Welcome, dear listener, to this journey through the surprisingly mundane yet brutally challenging world of Viking farming life. As you settle in for a moment of calm and relaxation, I invite you to share in the comments where in the world you're listening from and what time of day it is for you right now. I always love seeing how far our community of night owls stretches, from cozy bedrooms in Minnesota to late-night listeners in Norway. Perhaps even some descendants of the very farmers we'll be discussing tonight.
If you enjoy immersing yourself in the rich tapestry of history to unwind, consider subscribing for more soothing stories like this. Tonight, we're trading Hollywood's vision of horn-helmeted warriors for something far more accurate and infinitely more tedious. The daily grind of keeping yourself and your family alive in medieval Scandinavia. Picture, if you will, a landscape that makes modern Alaska look like a tropical paradise. It's roughly 950 AD, and you're standing in what will one day be called Norway. But right now, it's just a collection of fjords, forests, and unforgiving rocky soil that seems personally offended by your attempts to grow anything edible. The sun hangs low in the sky, even at midday, casting long shadows across your modest farmstead, which sounds romantic, until you realize those shadows represent the precious few hours of growing season you have each year. Congratulations, you're now a Viking farmer, which sounds like an oxymoron, but was actually the occupation of roughly 90% of the Norse population. While Hollywood has convinced us that Vikings spent their days pillaging monasteries and their evenings drinking mead from the skulls of their enemies, the truth is far more prosaic and infinitely more exhausting. You're more likely to die from a farming accident than in glorious battle. And your biggest enemy isn't Saxon warriors, but the constant grinding challenge of producing enough food to survive another harsh winter. Your day begins before dawn, not because you're particularly motivated, but because there simply aren't enough daylight hours to accomplish everything necessary for survival. The concept of sleeping in is as foreign to you as central heating or the weekend. You wake to the sound of your animals, if you're lucky enough to have any, demanding attention, and the knowledge that every single task you perform today could mean the difference between your family's survival and starvation. Let's talk about what your typical morning looks like, shall we? First, you'll need to check on your livestock. Assuming wolves, bears, or simple disease haven't reduced your herd overnight. Your animals are your life insurance policy, your banking system, and your primary source of protein all rolled into one. Each cow, sheep, goat, or pig represents months of careful feeding and protection, making their loss not just disappointing, but potentially catastrophic. Chapter 1. Dawn of the Farming Day. Picture this. It's 4 in the morning in medieval Norway, and the temperature inside your longhouse is barely above freezing, despite the smoldering fire that's been tended throughout the night. You're awakening not to an alarm clock, but to the internal rhythm that comes from years of rising before the sun, a biological necessity when your growing season lasts roughly 4 months if you're lucky. The first sensation you experience isn't the gentle transition from sleep to wakefulness that modern humans enjoy, but the immediate bone-deep awareness that survival requires action, and it requires it now. Your sleeping arrangements would make a modern camping enthusiast weep with homesickness for their memory foam mattress. You've spent the night on a raised platform covered with whatever animal skins and rough woolen blankets your household has managed to accumulate, sharing body heat with your family members not out of affection, but out of necessity. Privacy is a luxury concept that won't be invented for several centuries, and personal space is measured in inches rather than feet. The person sleeping next to you might be your spouse, your child, your elderly parent, or even a valued servant. Social hierarchies become remarkably fluid when hypothermia is a constant threat. The air inside your longhouse carries the distinctive aroma of unwashed human bodies, animal hide, wood smoke, and the vaguely sour smell of fermented foods that represent your primary defense against scurvy and malnutrition. It's not pleasant by modern standards, but it's the smell of survival, and after years of living with it, you've developed the same selective olfactory blindness that allows modern city dwellers to ignore car exhaust and garbage trucks. As you slowly extract yourself from your makeshift bed, taking care not to disturb the carefully arranged animal skins that serve as your blankets, your feet make contact with the packed earth floor of your longhouse. The ground beneath your dwelling is permanently frozen for much of the year, creating a natural refrigeration system that keeps your stored food from spoiling, while simultaneously ensuring that your living space never quite achieves what anyone would call comfortable. The concept of heated floors won't reach Scandinavia for several more centuries, making every morning a small act of courage as you commit to leaving the relative warmth of your bedding. Your first task, before even considering your own comfort, is to check the central fire that serves as the heart of your household. This fire has been burning continuously for months, perhaps even years, because starting a new fire from scratch is a time-consuming process that requires materials and skills you can't afford to waste. The fire provides heat, light, and the means to cook food, making it literally the difference between life and death for your family. A Viking farmer who lets his fire die out is a Viking farmer who has committed a potentially fatal error in judgment. The fire requires constant attention and feeding, but not with the convenient split logs that modern fireplace users enjoy. Your fuel consists of whatever combustible materials you've managed to gather, store, and dry during the brief summer months. This might include small branches, dried animal dung, peat, if you're fortunate enough to live near a bog, and occasionally precious pieces of actual firewood if you've had a particularly successful foraging season. Each piece of fuel represents hours of labor, making every moment of warmth a calculated investment in your family's survival. Tending the fire is a skill that requires years to master, involving the precise placement of fuel to maintain steady heat without consuming your winter stores too quickly. Too little fuel and your family freezes. Too much, and you run out of combustible materials before spring arrives. It's a delicate balance that requires constant attention and mathematical precision, though the mathematics are performed through instinct and experience rather than formal calculation. You've learned to read the fire like a modern meteorologist reads weather patterns, understanding its moods and needs through subtle changes in flame color, smoke patterns, and heat distribution. Once the fire is properly tended and your living space has achieved a temperature that could generously be described as survivable, your attention turns to the next pressing concern: Checking on your livestock. Your animals are housed in the same longhouse as your family, separated by only a low wooden partition that allows you to monitor their health and safety throughout the night. This arrangement, which would horrify modern health inspectors, is actually a sophisticated survival strategy that provides mutual benefit to both humans and animals. The animals generate body heat that helps warm the living space, while their proximity allows you to protect them from predators and thieves who might otherwise make off with your most valuable possessions. A Viking farmer's livestock represents years of careful breeding, feeding, and protection, making each animal worth far more than its modern equivalent. Losing a cow to wolves or raiders doesn't just mean less milk and meat. It means the potential difference between surviving the winter and slow starvation. Your morning inspection of the animals follows a routine that has been refined through generations of Norse farmers. Each animal must be visually examined for signs of illness, injury, or distress. You check their breathing, their posture, their appetite, and their general demeanor with the practiced eye of someone who understands that veterinary medicine consists primarily of prevention and prayer. A sick animal can't be taken to a veterinarian because veterinarians won't exist in any meaningful sense for several more centuries. Instead, you rely on folk remedies, herbal treatments, and the accumulated wisdom of your ancestors to keep your livestock healthy. The cattle, if you're fortunate enough to own any, receive the most attention during your morning inspection. Cows are the aristocrats of Viking livestock, providing milk, meat, leather, and social status in roughly equal measure. A family that owns multiple cows is a family that has achieved a level of prosperity that inspires both respect and envy in their neighbors. Your cows are not the massive, well-fed animals that modern dairy farms produce, but smaller, hardier creatures that have been bred for survival rather than maximum milk production. Milking your cows, assuming they're currently producing milk, is a task that requires timing, skill, and no small amount of diplomacy with animals. Viking-era cattle are not the docile, cooperative creatures that modern dairy operations have bred for maximum efficiency. These are semi-wild animals that have retained much of their natural wariness and independence, making every interaction a negotiation rather than a simple agricultural task.
The milking process begins with approaching each cow in a manner that communicates respect for their personal space, an acknowledgement of their ability to kick you into next week if they feel threatened or annoyed. You've learned to read the subtle signs of bovine mood, the position of their ears, the tension in their stance, the way they hold their tails. That indicate whether this morning's milking will be a cooperative effort or a battle of wills. Some cows are naturally more amenable to human interaction, while others seem to view the milking process as a daily insult to their dignity that must be endured rather than enjoyed.
Your milking technique has been developed through years of practice and several painful lessons in the consequences of poor cow handling skills. You approach from the side, moving slowly and speaking in the low rhythmic tones that cattle find reassuring. The milking itself is performed by hand, using a technique that maximizes milk production while minimizing the risk of injury to both yourself and the cow. This is not the quick, mechanical process that modern milking machines provide, but a slow, methodical procedure that can take anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes per cow, depending on their mood and milk production. The milk you collect is not the pasteurized, homogenized product that modern consumers expect, but raw milk that carries both exceptional nutritional value and significant health risks. You've learned to evaluate the quality of each cow's milk through sight, smell, and sometimes taste, checking for signs of mastitis or other conditions that might make the milk unsafe for consumption. Good milk is creamy, sweet-smelling, and free from unusual colors or textures, while problematic milk might be thin, sour, or contain visible blood or pus that indicates infection. Processing the morning's milk yield requires immediate attention because refrigeration consists of whatever cool, dark space you can find in your dwelling. During the warmer months, milk spoils within hours if not properly handled, making dairy management a race against time and bacterial growth. You've developed techniques for extending milk's usable life through various fermentation processes that create products like Skyr, a type of cultured dairy product that provides protein and probiotics while lasting significantly longer than fresh milk. The butter-making process, when you have sufficient cream, is a labor-intensive activity that requires patience, timing, and considerable physical effort. You collect cream from multiple milkings, allowing it to reach the proper consistency and slight sourness that makes churning possible. The churning itself is performed using a wooden churn and paddle, requiring rhythmic agitation that can take anywhere from 30 minutes to over an hour, depending on temperature, cream quality, and probably the phase of the moon for all the predictability the process offers. Your sheep, if you've managed to maintain a flock, represent a different set of challenges and opportunities. Sheep provide wool, meat, milk, and leather, making them incredibly valuable multi-purpose animals that can adapt to the harsh Scandinavian climate better than many other livestock options. However, sheep are also remarkably talented at finding creative ways to injure themselves, escape from enclosures, or simply disappear without explanation, making sheep farming an exercise in constant vigilance and problem-solving. The morning inspection of your sheep flock requires counting each animal and checking for signs of illness, injury, or pregnancy. Sheep are prey animals that have evolved to hide signs of weakness or distress, making health assessment a matter of subtle observation and intuition. You look for changes in behavior, posture, appetite, and social dynamics within the flock that might indicate problems requiring attention. A sheep that separates itself from the group, refuses to eat, or shows signs of labored breathing might be developing health issues that could spread to the entire flock if not addressed quickly. Sheep shearing, when the season arrives, is a skill that requires years to master and represents one of the most valuable harvests your farm produces. The wool from your sheep will be processed into clothing, blankets, and trade goods that can be exchanged for items your farm cannot produce. The quality of your wool depends on the health and nutrition of your sheep, the timing of the shearing, and your skill in removing the fleece without damaging the fibers or injuring the animal. Your goats, if you keep them, are perhaps the most independent and opinionated members of your livestock family. Goats are incredibly hardy animals that can survive on vegetation that other livestock cannot digest, making them valuable additions to farms with limited pasture or poor quality grazing land. However, goats are also escape artists with an apparently supernatural ability to find weaknesses in any enclosure and an insatiable curiosity about everything they're not supposed to eat, including your carefully cultivated crops. The relationship between a Viking farmer and his goats is one of mutual respect mixed with constant suspicion. You appreciate their ability to provide milk, meat, and leather while requiring minimal care and feeding. But you also understand that turning your back on a goat for more than a few minutes is an invitation to discover that they've eaten your winter seed supply, or somehow managed to get themselves tangled in your fishing nets. Goat management requires the same vigilance that modern parents apply to toddlers, combined with the negotiation skills of a diplomat. The feeding of your livestock represents one of the most critical and resource-intensive aspects of your daily routine, requiring careful calculation of nutritional needs, available fodder, and the need to ensure that your animals survive until spring without consuming your own food reserves. The concept of abundant, high-quality animal feed is as foreign to you as space travel, making every feeding decision a complex mathematical problem with life or death consequences. Your fodder supplies consist of whatever plant material you've managed to harvest, preserve, and store during the brief growing season. This might include hay, if you've been fortunate enough to find suitable grassland and have the labor available to cut and dry it properly. More likely, your animal feed consists of straw, dried seaweed, tree branches, and various wild plants that you've identified as nutritious and non-toxic through generations of accumulated knowledge. The process of feeding your animals requires careful rationing that would make a modern nutritionist weep with frustration. You must provide enough nutrition to keep your livestock healthy and productive, while ensuring that your fodder supplies last through the entire winter and into spring when fresh grazing becomes available. This requires daily calculations based on the current health and productivity of each animal, the quality and quantity of available feed, and your best estimate of how many more weeks of winter weather you'll need to endure. Each animal receives its portion of feed based on a complex hierarchy of need and value. Pregnant or nursing animals receive priority, followed by your most productive milkers, then breeding animals, and finally, the rest of your livestock. This is not a decision made out of sentiment, but out of cold, practical calculation of which animals are most essential to your family's survival. A cow that produces abundant milk receives better nutrition than one that gives little, because survival requires difficult choices about resource allocation. The feeding process itself is a careful ritual designed to minimize waste while ensuring that each animal receives its fair share. You've learned to distribute feed in a manner that prevents the dominant animals from monopolizing the available nutrition while ensuring that smaller or weaker animals still receive adequate nourishment. This requires understanding the social dynamics of your livestock and intervening when necessary to ensure equitable distribution. Water provision during the winter months presents its own set of challenges that would boggle the mind of modern farmers with their heated waterers and automatic systems. Your water source, whether it's a well, stream, or collected rainwater, is likely to be frozen solid for much of the winter, requiring daily labor to break ice and provide liquid water for your animals. This might involve hauling water from a distant source, melting snow or ice over your fire, or maintaining a small ice-free area in a stream through constant attention. The amount of water your animals require varies based on their size, productivity, and the temperature, but it's always more than you'd prefer to carry by hand in sub-freezing temperatures. A lactating cow requires significantly more water than a dry cow, and sheep need access to clean water to maintain their health and wool quality. You've developed techniques for conserving water and maximizing its availability, including methods for melting ice efficiently and storing liquid water in containers that resist freezing. As the morning feeding routine concludes, you take a moment to assess the overall condition of your livestock and plan for the day's additional animal-related tasks. This might include mucking out the animal areas of your longhouse, a task that's exactly as pleasant as it sounds, but essential for maintaining the health of both your animals and your family. The accumulated manure from your livestock will eventually become valuable fertilizer for your crops, but in the meantime, it represents a sanitation challenge that requires constant attention.
The manure removal process involves carefully collecting and storing animal waste in a manner that prevents contamination of your living space while preserving its value as fertilizer. This is typically done using wooden shovels and baskets, with the collected manure being stored in designated areas where it can decompose and mature into the rich fertilizer that will feed next year's crops. The irony that your survival depends on carefully managing animal excrement is not lost on you. But survival rarely concerns itself with dignity.
Your morning livestock routine concludes with a final inspection to ensure that all animals are accounted for, healthy, and secure. You check the integrity of the partitions that separate your animals from your living space, looking for signs of damage that might allow animals to wander into areas where they don't belong. You also verify that the entrances to your longhouse are properly secured against predators that might view your livestock as convenient prey. The completion of your morning animal care routine represents a significant accomplishment, but it's merely the first of many essential tasks that must be completed before the day ends. As you prepare to turn your attention to other pressing concerns, you carry with you the satisfaction of knowing that your most valuable possessions, your livestock, are properly cared for and ready to face another day in the ongoing battle for survival that defines Viking farming life. Chapter 2: The Eternal Battle with Soil and Season. Now that your animals have been tended to with the care and attention befitting your most valuable possessions, it's time to turn your attention to the next overwhelming challenge of Viking farming life, attempting to coax edible crops from soil that seems to have been specifically designed by malevolent gods to frustrate human agricultural ambitions. Picture this. You're standing at the edge of what optimistically might be called your field, surveying land that makes modern farmers' worst nightmares look like a gardening magazine cover. The soil beneath your feet is a complex mixture of rock, sand, clay, and organic matter that has been deposited by centuries of glacial activity, seasonal flooding, and the gradual decomposition of whatever hardy plants have managed to survive in this climate. It's not the rich, dark loam that modern agricultural textbooks describe. but a challenging medium that requires constant attention, amendment, and probably a fair amount of prayer to produce anything resembling a reliable harvest. Your farming tools, which represent a significant investment in both materials and craftsmanship, would be recognized by modern archaeologists as primitive, but would be understood by any subsistence farmer as ingenious solutions to complex agricultural challenges. Your primary implement is a wooden plow, possibly reinforced with iron. If you've been particularly fortunate in your trades or raids, pulled by whatever draft animals you've managed to acquire and maintain. This is not the sophisticated machinery that modern agriculture employs, but a simple, effective tool that has been refined through generations of use. The plowing process itself is a battle between human determination and natural resistance that requires physical strength, technical skill, and strategic thinking. Your plow doesn't cut through the earth with the ease that modern equipment provides, but rather breaks and turns the soil through brute force applied over many hours of backbreaking labor. Each furrow represents a small victory against the elements, creating the foundation for whatever crops you hope to grow in the coming season. The timing of your plowing activities is critical and depends on a complex set of environmental factors that you've learned to read through years of experience. The soil must be neither too wet nor too dry, neither frozen solid nor so muddy that your plow becomes mired in the field. You wait for the brief window when conditions are optimal, knowing that missing this opportunity might mean the difference between a successful harvest and a hungry winter. Your draft animals, if you're fortunate enough to own them, are probably oxen or sturdy horses that have been bred for strength and endurance rather than speed or elegance. These animals represent a massive investment in resources and care, requiring daily attention, specialized feeding, and protection from the various dangers that threaten valuable livestock. An ox or horse capable of pulling a plow is worth more than most families' entire annual income, making their health and welfare a matter of constant concern. The partnership between farmer and draft animal is one of mutual dependence and careful negotiation. Your oxen or horses must be strong enough to pull the plow through resistant soil, but they also must be calm enough to work in close proximity to humans and intelligent enough to respond to the complex commands required for effective plowing. This relationship is built through years of interaction, training, and the kind of understanding that develops between individuals who depend on each other for survival. Working with draft animals requires skills that extend far beyond simple animal husbandry. You must understand the mechanics of harnesses, yokes, and other equipment that transfers the animal's strength to your agricultural implements. You must be able to maintain and repair this equipment using whatever materials are available, because the nearest harness maker might be several days' journey away, assuming one exists at all in your region. The process of preparing your fields extends beyond simple plowing to include the removal of stones, weeds, and other obstacles that might interfere with crop growth. This is perhaps the most tedious aspect of Viking farming, requiring hours of bent-over labor as you carefully examine every square foot of cultivated land, removing rocks that could damage your tools or interfere with plant growth. The stones you collect aren't waste products, but valuable materials that can be used for construction, drainage, or other farm improvements. Soil amendment in the Viking Age relies on whatever organic materials you can produce, collect, or acquire through trade. Your primary source of fertilizer is the manure from your livestock, carefully aged and composted to maximize its nutritional value while minimizing the risk of crop contamination. This represents a closed-loop system where your animals consume plant materials and convert them into fertilizer that feeds the crops that will eventually feed both you and your livestock. The application of fertilizer is both art and science, requiring careful calculation of nutritional needs, application rates, and timing. Too little fertilizer and your crops struggle to achieve adequate growth. Too much, and you risk burning your plants or wasting valuable resources that took months to produce. You've learned to evaluate soil fertility through observation, experimentation, and the accumulated wisdom of previous generations of farmers who faced similar challenges. The selection and management of seeds represents one of the most critical decisions a Viking farmer faces, because the quality and variety of your seeds directly determine your family's survival prospects for the coming year. Unlike modern farmers who can simply order seeds from catalogs or purchase them from agricultural suppliers, you must carefully preserve, select, and sometimes trade for the genetic material that will produce next year's crops. This makes seed management a complex process that requires planning, storage expertise, and a deep understanding of plant genetics that has been developed through centuries of trial and error. Your seed collection consists of whatever varieties have proven capable of surviving in your particular climate and soil conditions, which means you're working with crops that might be unrecognizable to modern farmers accustomed to hybrid varieties bred for maximum yield and disease resistance. Your grains are likely to be hardy varieties of barley, rye, and oats that can tolerate short growing seasons, poor soil, and unpredictable weather conditions. These are not the high-yielding varieties that modern agriculture produces, but they are survivors that have been tested by generations of harsh Scandinavian winters. The preservation of seeds from one growing season to the next requires storage techniques that protect them from moisture, rodents, insects, and fungal contamination, while maintaining their viability for planting. You've developed methods for drying, storing, and protecting seeds, using whatever materials are available, including special containers, natural preservatives, and storage locations that provide the proper environmental conditions. The loss of your seed stock to spoilage or pests represents a catastrophic failure that could leave your family without crops for an entire growing season. Seed selection is a sophisticated process that involves choosing the best specimens from each harvest to preserve for future planting. This requires evaluating plants based on their vigor, disease resistance, productivity, and adaptability to local conditions. You save seeds from the strongest plants, the earliest ripening varieties, and those that demonstrate the best survival characteristics. This is practical plant breeding that improves your crops over time while maintaining the genetic diversity necessary for long-term survival.
The timing of planting is perhaps the most critical decision a Viking farmer makes each year, requiring accurate assessment of weather patterns, soil conditions, and seasonal progression. Plant too early and late frosts will kill your seedlings. Plant too late and your crops won't have sufficient time to mature before the first killing frost of autumn. You've learned to read environmental signs that indicate optimal planting times, including soil temperature, air temperature, daylight hours, and the behavior of local wildlife and wild plants. Your planting methods are designed to maximize germination rates while conserving precious seeds that represent months of careful preservation and selection. This might involve pre-treating seeds to improve germination, planting in carefully prepared seed beds, or using specific spacing and depth techniques that have been developed through generations of experience. Each seed planted represents a significant investment in time, labor, and resources, making efficient planting techniques essential for farming success. The crops you choose to plant are determined by a complex calculation that balances nutritional needs, storage requirements, climate adaptability, and market value. Your primary focus is on grains that provide the carbohydrates necessary for survival, but you also need to produce crops that supply protein, vitamins, and minerals essential for health. This might include legumes that fix nitrogen in the soil while providing plant protein, root vegetables that store well through the winter, and herbs that serve both culinary and medicinal purposes. Barley is likely to be your most important crop, providing the foundation for both food and the ale that serves as a safe alternative to potentially contaminated water sources. Barley is remarkably hardy and can tolerate the short growing seasons and unpredictable weather that characterize Scandinavian agriculture. Your barley varieties have been selected for their ability to ripen quickly, resist disease, and produce acceptable yields, even under challenging conditions. Rye represents another critical crop that can survive in soils and climates where wheat fails to thrive. Rye is particularly valuable because it can be planted in the fall and harvested the following summer, extending your growing season and providing crop insurance against spring planting failures. Your rye bread might not match the quality of wheat bread, but it provides essential nutrition and can be stored for extended periods when properly prepared. Oats serve multiple purposes in your agricultural system, providing food for both humans and livestock, while improving soil fertility through their nitrogen-fixing capabilities. Oats are particularly valuable for feeding horses and cattle, providing the high-energy nutrition that draft animals require for heavy work. The oats you grow are probably smaller and less refined than modern varieties, but they are hardy survivors that can produce acceptable yields even in marginal conditions. Root vegetables like turnips, carrots, and onions provide essential vitamins and minerals, while offering excellent storage characteristics that allow them to supply fresh food throughout the winter months. These crops are particularly valuable because they can be stored in root cellars or buried in sand, providing fresh vegetables when other food sources are limited to preserved or dried alternatives. Once your crops are planted, the real anxiety begins because you've now committed your most valuable resources, seeds, land, labor, and time, to a gamble with nature that offers no guarantees and numerous opportunities for catastrophic failure. The growing season becomes a period of constant vigilance, assessment, and intervention as you attempt to protect your investment against the countless threats that can destroy months of work in a matter of hours. Weather monitoring becomes an obsession that rivals modern meteorologists. Attention to atmospheric conditions, because your survival depends on accurately predicting and responding to weather patterns that can make the difference between feast and famine. You've learned to read cloud formations, wind patterns, animal behavior, and plant responses to identify approaching weather systems and their potential impact on your crops. This is not casual observation, but life or death intelligence gathering that influences every decision you make during the growing season. Drought represents one of the most devastating threats to your crops, because irrigation systems are limited to whatever water sources you can access and whatever delivery methods you can devise using available materials. Your drought management strategies might include rationing water from wells or streams, collecting and storing rainwater, or selecting crop varieties that can tolerate extended periods without adequate moisture. The irony that you live in a region known for its harsh winters and abundant precipitation is not lost on you when you're watching your crops wither during an unexpectedly dry summer. Pest management in the Viking Age relies on prevention, biological controls, and whatever natural remedies have proven effective through generations of experimentation. Your primary pests include insects, rodents, birds, and various plant diseases that can devastate crops if not properly managed. You've developed techniques for encouraging beneficial insects and animals that prey on crop pests, using companion planting to deter harmful insects, and applying natural treatments that protect plants without poisoning the food you'll eventually consume. Bird damage represents a particular challenge, because the same birds that help control insect pests also view your ripening grain crops as a convenient food source. Your bird control methods might include scarecrows, noisemakers, netting, or the time-honored tradition of having children chase birds away from the fields. This is a constant battle that requires vigilance throughout the growing season, because birds can consume or damage significant portions of your harvest if left unchecked. Disease management in crops requires the same careful observation and prevention strategies that you apply to livestock health. You monitor your plants for signs of fungal infections, bacterial diseases, and viral problems that can spread rapidly through your fields if not identified and addressed quickly. Your treatment options are limited to whatever natural remedies and cultural practices have proven effective, making prevention through proper planting, spacing, and sanitation your primary defense against crop diseases. Weed control represents an ongoing battle that requires constant attention throughout the growing season. Weeds compete with your crops for nutrients, water, and sunlight, while potentially harboring pests and diseases that can spread to your cultivated plants. Your weed management strategies involve hand cultivation, hoeing, and the strategic use of draft animals to cultivate between crop rows. This is backbreaking labor that must be performed repeatedly throughout the growing season, but is essential for maintaining productive crops. The harvest season brings both relief and intense anxiety as you race against time and weather to collect the fruits of your labor before they can be destroyed by early frost, excessive rain, or other environmental hazards. Harvest timing is critical because crops that are collected too early may not have achieved full nutritional value, while those left too long in the field risk spoilage or destruction by weather events. Your harvest methods depend on the crops you're collecting and the tools available for the task. Grain harvests typically involve cutting mature plants with sickles or scythes, bundling them into sheaves, and allowing them to dry before threshing to separate the grain from the stalks. This is labor-intensive work that requires careful timing and favorable weather conditions for success. Threshing and winnowing represent the final steps in converting your standing crops into usable grain that can be stored, processed, and consumed throughout the coming year. Threshing involves beating the dried grain plants to separate the seeds from the stalks and chaff, while winnowing uses wind to separate the heavier grain from the lighter chaff and debris. These processes require proper equipment, adequate workspace, and favorable weather conditions that allow for efficient separation and drying. The calculation of harvest yields determines your family's survival prospects for the coming year and influences every decision you'll make about food storage, seed preservation, and resource allocation. You must estimate how much grain to set aside for seed, how much to allocate for family consumption, how much to reserve for livestock feed, and how much might be available for trade or barter. These calculations involve complex mathematics that balance current needs against future requirements while accounting for the uncertainties of weather, storage losses, and unexpected demands on your resources. As the harvest season concludes and you survey the results of your agricultural gamble, you experience the particular satisfaction that comes from having successfully extracted life from unwilling soil through months of careful labor and constant vigilance. The grain stored in your bins represents not just food for the coming year, but proof that you've mastered the complex skills necessary for survival in one of the world's most challenging agricultural environments. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and the beginning of another cycle in the endless rhythm of Viking farming life. But tonight, you can rest with the knowledge that you've won another round in the eternal battle between human determination and natural resistance. Chapter 3. The Architecture of Survival. Building and Maintaining the Viking Homestead.
Let's talk about the architectural marvel that serves as the center of your Viking farming existence, the Longhouse, which sounds far more impressive than the reality of living in what essentially amounts to a very large, very smoky barn that you share with your family, your servants, your livestock, and whatever rodents have decided to take up permanent residence in your walls. The Longhouse represents the culmination of centuries of trial and error in designing structures that can withstand the punishing Scandinavian climate while providing shelter for everything necessary for survival. Picture this. You're standing inside a building that might stretch anywhere from 60 to 120 feet in length, depending on your family's prosperity and the size of your household. The interior is a single open space divided by function rather than walls, with your family's living area occupying the center section, while livestock quarters extend toward both ends of the structure. This arrangement, which would horrify modern architects concerned with sanitation and privacy, represents a sophisticated solution to the challenge of maintaining both humans and animals in a climate where separate buildings would be impossible to heat effectively. The construction of your longhouse began years ago with the careful selection of timber that would form the structural framework of your dwelling. The massive wooden posts that support the roof are not simply trees that were conveniently located near your building site, but carefully chosen specimens that were selected for their straightness, strength, and resistance to rot. These posts, which might measure 2 feet or more in diameter, represent a significant investment in both materials and labor, because transporting and installing them required the coordinated effort of your entire community. The walls of your longhouse are constructed using techniques that balance the need for structural integrity with the availability of materials and the limitations of available tools. Your walls might be built using a combination of timber framing, wattle and daub construction, or carefully fitted logs, depending on local building traditions and the materials available in your region. The spaces between structural elements are filled with whatever insulating materials can be gathered, including moss, animal hair, clay, and stones, creating a barrier against the elements that is effective, if not particularly elegant. The roof of your longhouse represents perhaps the most critical element of the entire structure, because failure of the roof system means exposure to weather that can quickly prove fatal during the winter months. Your roof is constructed using a framework of timber rafters covered with layers of birch bark, turf, or wooden shingles, creating a weatherproof barrier that can withstand the weight of accumulated snow while shedding rain, and providing insulation against temperature extremes. The construction and maintenance of this roof system requires specialized knowledge and skills that are passed down through generations of builders. The floor of your longhouse is typically constructed of packed earth, wooden planks, or stone slabs, depending on local materials and building traditions. The earthen floors that are most common in Viking longhouses are not simply bare dirt, but carefully prepared surfaces that have been compacted, leveled, and treated with materials that reduce dust and improve durability. These floors are covered with layers of straw, rushes, or other organic materials that provide insulation, absorb moisture, and create a more comfortable walking surface. The floor coverings must be replaced regularly as they become soiled or worn, creating a constant demand for suitable materials. The central hearth that dominates your living space is far more than a simple fire pit, representing a carefully engineered system for heating, cooking, and light that has been refined through generations of use. The hearth is typically constructed of stone or clay, surrounded by a raised area that contains the fire while directing smoke toward the roof opening that serves as your chimney. The design of this system requires precise calculation of airflow, fuel consumption, and heat distribution to ensure that the fire burns efficiently while providing maximum warmth to the living space. The smoke management system in your longhouse is a critical element that determines whether your dwelling is habitable or simply a very large smokehouse that happens to contain people. The roof opening that allows smoke to escape must be sized correctly to provide adequate ventilation, while minimizing heat loss and preventing rain or snow from entering the living space. This opening can be partially covered during severe weather using movable panels or screens that allow smoke to escape while reducing exposure to the elements. The interior organization of your longhouse follows patterns that have been developed through practical experience and refined through generations of use. The area immediately around the central hearth serves as the primary living, cooking, and working space for your family, while sleeping areas are located on raised platforms along the sides of the building. These platforms, which serve as beds, storage areas, and workspace, are constructed using whatever materials are available and are covered with animal skins, woolen blankets, and straw mattresses that provide comfort and insulation. Storage systems within your longhouse are designed to maximize the use of available space while protecting your possessions from moisture, pests, and theft. Your storage solutions might include wooden chests, ceramic vessels, woven baskets, and specialized containers for different types of goods. These storage systems must be carefully designed to prevent contamination of food supplies while allowing easy access to frequently used items. The placement of storage areas within your longhouse is determined by factors including accessibility, security, and protection from moisture and temperature extremes. The lighting system in your longhouse relies primarily on the central fire, supplemented by oil lamps, candles, or torches when additional illumination is needed. These lighting methods are expensive in terms of fuel consumption and require constant attention to prevent fires that could destroy your dwelling and everything in it. The management of indoor lighting requires careful balance between the need for visibility and the conservation of precious fuel resources that must last through the long winter months. The construction of a Viking longhouse represents one of the most significant economic undertakings that a farming family can attempt, requiring the coordination of materials, labor, and specialized skills that might take years to acquire and assemble. The timber alone for a substantial longhouse represents the harvest from acres of forest land, requiring not only access to suitable trees, but also the tools, skills, and labor necessary to fell, transport, and process logs into usable building materials. The tools required for longhouse construction are themselves major investments that represent months or years of a craftsman's labor. Your primary construction tools include axes for felling trees and shaping timber, adzes for smoothing wooden surfaces, augers for drilling holes, and various specialized implements for joining wooden elements together. These tools must be maintained in perfect condition throughout the construction process, requiring access to blacksmithing services and the materials necessary for tool repair and sharpening. The labor requirements for longhouse construction extend far beyond what a single family can provide, necessitating the coordination of community work parties, hired laborers, or the calling in of social obligations that require neighbors to provide assistance. The raising of the major structural elements, including the installation of the primary support posts and roof beams, requires the coordinated effort of dozens of workers operating under the direction of experienced builders who understand the complexities of timber framing. The acquisition of specialized materials for longhouse construction often requires trade relationships that extend across considerable distances. Iron hardware for joining timber elements, specialized roofing materials, and finishing products might need to be obtained from craftsmen located days or weeks of travel away. These trade relationships require the investment of agricultural surplus, craft products, or other valuable goods that represent significant portions of your family's annual production. The foundation system for your longhouse must be designed to provide stable support for the massive timber frame while preventing moisture damage that could lead to structural failure. This typically involves the excavation of post holes that extend below the frost line, the installation of stone footings or wooden sills that distribute the building's weight, and the careful placement of structural elements to ensure that the building remains level and stable over time. The foundation work represents a significant portion of the total construction effort and requires skills that are developed through years of experience. The timing of longhouse construction is critical because certain phases of the work can only be performed under specific weather conditions. Timber cutting must be done when the sap is down to prevent excessive shrinkage and splitting, while foundation work requires soil conditions that allow for proper excavation and drainage. The coordination of these timing requirements with the availability of labor and materials creates a complex scheduling challenge that requires careful planning and flexibility.
The roofing system installation represents perhaps the most technically challenging aspect of longhouse construction, requiring specialized knowledge of structural engineering, weatherproofing, and materials science that has been developed through generations of trial and error. The installation of roof timbers must be precisely calculated to distribute loads evenly, while providing adequate support for the weight of roofing materials and accumulated snow. The waterproofing system must be carefully layered to shed water effectively, while providing insulation against temperature extremes.
The maintenance requirements for a Viking longhouse are ongoing and extensive, requiring constant attention to prevent small problems from developing into major structural failures. Regular inspection of the timber frame is necessary to identify signs of rot, insect damage, or structural movement that could compromise the building's integrity. The replacement of damaged or deteriorated structural elements requires the same skills and materials that were used in the original construction, making maintenance a significant ongoing expense. The roof maintenance schedule is particularly demanding because exposure to weather extremes creates constant wear that must be addressed to prevent water infiltration. The turf roofs that are common in Viking architecture require regular inspection and repair to maintain their weatherproofing properties, while wooden shingle roofs need periodic replacement of damaged or deteriorated elements. The maintenance of the roof opening that serves as a chimney requires regular cleaning and repair to ensure proper smoke ventilation. Interior maintenance involves the regular replacement of floor coverings, the repair of sleeping platforms and storage systems, and the ongoing care of the central hearth system. The packed earth floors must be periodically renewed with fresh materials, while wooden elements require treatment with oils or other preservatives to prevent rot and insect damage. The central hearth requires regular cleaning and repair to maintain its efficiency and prevent fire hazards that could destroy the entire structure. The longhouse, impressive as it may be, represents only one component of the complex infrastructure required to support a Viking farming operation. Your homestead requires a network of specialized buildings, storage facilities, and processing areas that allow you to perform the countless tasks necessary for survival in a subsistence economy. Each additional structure represents a significant investment in materials and labor, while providing essential capabilities that cannot be accommodated within the main dwelling. Your grain storage facility, which might be a separate building or a specialized area within your longhouse, represents one of your most critical infrastructure investments. The ability to store grain safely through the winter months while protecting it from moisture, rodents, and theft determines your family's survival prospects and economic security. Your grain storage system must provide protection from the elements while allowing for proper ventilation that prevents spoilage from mold and mildew. The construction of effective grain storage requires understanding of the principles of food preservation that have been developed through centuries of trial and error. Your storage containers might be constructed of wood, ceramic, or woven materials, each offering different advantages in terms of protection, durability, and cost. The placement of these storage systems within your homestead must balance accessibility with security, ensuring that you can access your grain supplies easily while protecting them from both two-legged and four-legged thieves. Your workshop area, whether it's a separate building or a designated space within your longhouse, provides the facilities necessary for the countless repair and construction tasks that are required to maintain your farming operation. This space must accommodate the tools and materials necessary for woodworking, metalworking, textile production, and food processing, while providing adequate lighting and ventilation for safe and efficient work. The tool storage and maintenance systems within your workshop represent a significant investment in organizational infrastructure that protects your valuable implements while ensuring that they remain in good working condition. Your tools must be protected from moisture and rust while remaining easily accessible for frequent use. The maintenance of cutting tools requires access to sharpening stones and the skills necessary to maintain proper blade geometry and sharpness. Your food processing facilities extend beyond simple cooking to include specialized areas for brewing, dairy processing, meat preservation, and the preparation of other preserved foods that will sustain your family through the winter months. Each type of food processing requires specific equipment, environmental conditions, and storage facilities that must be carefully designed and maintained to ensure food safety and quality. The brewing area, which is essential for producing the ale that serves as both nutrition and safe drinking water, requires specialized equipment, including fermentation vessels, storage containers, and processing tools that are dedicated exclusively to brewing activities. The brewing process itself requires careful temperature control, sanitation, and timing that can only be achieved with proper facilities and equipment. Your dairy processing area must provide the facilities necessary for churning butter, making cheese, and processing other dairy products that extend the usable life of milk while providing essential nutrition. This requires specialized equipment, including churns, presses, and aging facilities that allow for the production of high-quality dairy products that can be stored for extended periods. The meat processing and preservation facilities on your homestead provide the capabilities necessary for slaughtering livestock and preserving meat through smoking, salting, and drying techniques that prevent spoilage while maintaining nutritional value. These facilities must be designed to maintain sanitary conditions while providing the environmental controls necessary for effective food preservation. Your root cellar or underground storage facility provides the controlled environment necessary for storing vegetables, preserved foods, and other perishable goods through the winter months. The construction of an effective root cellar requires understanding of soil conditions, drainage, insulation, and ventilation that maintains optimal storage conditions while preventing freezing or excessive moisture. The water management systems on your homestead include wells, cisterns, drainage systems, and other infrastructure that provides reliable access to clean water while preventing flooding and moisture problems that could damage buildings and stored goods. The construction and maintenance of these systems requires specialized knowledge of hydraulics, soil conditions, and construction techniques that have been developed through generations of experience. Your waste management systems, including privies, drainage systems, and composting facilities, provide essential sanitation services while recovering valuable resources that can be used to improve soil fertility and crop production. The design of these systems must balance sanitation requirements with resource recovery while preventing contamination of water supplies and living areas. The perimeter defenses of your homestead, including fences, gates, and other security measures, provide protection for your family, livestock, and stored goods while defining the boundaries of your property. These defenses must be substantial enough to deter both human and animal threats, while allowing for the normal movement of people and livestock during daily operations. The roads and pathways that connect your various facilities and provide access to your fields and pastures represent infrastructure investments that improve the efficiency of daily operations while reducing the labor required for transportation tasks. The maintenance of these transportation systems requires ongoing attention to drainage, surface conditions, and seasonal accessibility that ensures reliable movement of people, animals, and goods throughout the year. As you survey the complex infrastructure that supports your Viking farming operation, you begin to appreciate the enormous investment in time, materials, and specialized knowledge that has been required to create a homestead capable of supporting your family's survival. Each building, each system, each carefully planned component represents a victory against the harsh realities of medieval life, creating the foundation for another year of successful farming in one of the world's most challenging environments. Tomorrow will bring new maintenance tasks, new construction projects, and new challenges to the infrastructure that supports your way of life. But tonight, you can rest with the satisfaction of having created a homestead that stands as testament to human ingenuity and determination. Chapter 4: The Rhythm of Seasons, Managing Time in a Climate of Extremes. As winter's grip finally begins to loosen its hold on your farmstead, you experience the cautious optimism that comes with the arrival of spring. Though calling it spring in medieval Scandinavia is perhaps overly generous when describing weather that would still be considered harsh winter conditions in more temperate regions. The seasonal transition that modern calendar systems mark as the beginning of spring is, for you, merely the start of a frantic race against time to accomplish months' worth of essential tasks before the next winter arrives to test your preparations once again.
Picture this. It's sometime in what modern calendars call March or April, though your temporal awareness is based more on environmental signs than arbitrary human constructs, and you're standing in your doorway surveying a landscape that remains largely frozen, despite the gradually lengthening daylight hours. The snow that has covered your land for the past 4 or 5 months is beginning to show signs of retreat, creating muddy patches that reveal the earth beneath, while simultaneously creating transportation nightmares that make simple tasks exponentially more difficult.
The transition from winter to spring presents unique challenges that require careful planning and precise timing to navigate successfully. The melting snow creates flooding conditions that can damage stored goods, threaten livestock, and make fieldwork impossible, while simultaneously providing the moisture that will be essential for the coming growing season. Managing this transition requires understanding of drainage patterns, soil conditions, and weather trends that has been developed through years of careful observation and occasionally painful experience. Your first spring tasks involve assessing the damage that winter has inflicted on your homestead infrastructure, livestock, and stored supplies. The months of harsh weather, heavy snow loads, and extreme temperature fluctuations have stressed every component of your farming operation, creating a maintenance backlog that must be addressed before the demands of the growing season make such work impossible. This assessment process requires systematic inspection of buildings, equipment, animals, and supplies to identify problems that require immediate attention. The evaluation of your livestock after their winter confinement reveals the true cost of surviving the harsh season, as you assess which animals have successfully maintained their health and productivity, and which may have suffered from the stress of limited nutrition, confined quarters, and extreme weather conditions. Some animals emerge from winter in acceptable condition, ready to resume their productive roles in your farming operation, while others may require extended care or may not have survived the season at all. Your feed supplies, which seemed adequate when winter began, are now running dangerously low as you face the final weeks before pasture becomes available for grazing. The careful rationing that has sustained your animals through the winter months must continue even as their nutritional needs increase with the approaching breeding season and the physical demands of spring work. Every handful of hay or grain represents a calculated decision about resource allocation that could determine whether your animals remain productive or begin the downward spiral that leads to death from malnutrition. The spring cleaning process that follows months of winter confinement is not the cheerful domestic activity that modern homemakers might recognize, but a necessary sanitation effort that prevents disease and prepares your living and working spaces for the intense activity of the growing season. The accumulated debris, animal waste, and general disorder that results from months of confined living must be addressed systematically to create the clean, organized environment necessary for effective spring operations. The mucking out of animal quarters represents one of the most physically demanding aspects of spring cleaning, requiring the removal of months' worth of accumulated manure, soiled bedding, and debris that has built up during the winter confinement period. This material, while unpleasant to handle, represents valuable fertilizer that will improve your soil fertility and crop production, making its careful collection and storage an important component of your agricultural system. Your equipment maintenance program begins in earnest as you prepare the tools and implements that will be essential for spring planting and field preparation. The plows, harrows, hand tools, and other equipment that has been stored during the winter months must be inspected, repaired, and sharpened to ensure that they are ready for the intensive use that the coming season will demand. This maintenance work requires access to materials and skills that may not be readily available, making advanced planning essential for successful completion. The sharpening of cutting tools, including axes, scythes, sickles, and various knives, requires access to grindstones and the specialized knowledge necessary to maintain proper blade geometry and cutting efficiency. Your cutting tools are essential for virtually every task on your farm. from food preparation to timber harvesting, making their maintenance a critical component of your operational readiness. The arrival of what passes for summer in Scandinavia brings with it a period of almost frantic activity as you attempt to accomplish, in just a few short months, all of the tasks that will determine your survival through the coming winter. The concept of leisurely summer days spent relaxing in pleasant weather is as foreign to your experience as air conditioning or paid vacation time. Because summer represents your only opportunity to grow food, gather materials, and complete the countless projects that winter's harsh conditions made impossible. Your summer workday begins before dawn and extends well into the evening, taking advantage of the extended daylight hours that are one of the few benefits of your northern latitude. During the peak of summer, you may have as much as 18 to 20 hours of usable daylight, creating a natural tendency to work extended schedules that would horrify modern labor unions, but are essential for maximizing productivity during the brief growing season. The field work that dominates your summer schedule requires careful coordination of multiple activities that must be completed in precise sequence to ensure successful crop production. Your crops must be planted, cultivated, protected from pests and weather, and harvested within the narrow window of favorable growing conditions, leaving no room for delays or inefficiencies that could jeopardize your food security. The cultivation of your grain crops requires repeated attention throughout the growing season as you battle weeds, pests, and weather conditions that threaten to destroy months of careful work. Your cultivation techniques, which rely primarily on hand tools and animal-powered implements, require physical strength, technical skill, and an understanding of plant biology that has been developed through generations of agricultural experience. Weed control represents an ongoing battle that requires constant vigilance and repeated intervention throughout the growing season. The weeds that compete with your crops for nutrients, water, and sunlight are remarkably well adapted to local conditions and seem to possess an almost supernatural ability to thrive under conditions that challenge your carefully cultivated plants. Your weed management strategies include hand cultivation, hoeing, and the strategic use of draft animals to cultivate between crop rows. The haymaking process, which is essential for producing the animal feed that will sustain your livestock through the winter, requires precise timing and favorable weather conditions that may occur only briefly during the summer season. Your hay must be cut when the grass reaches optimal nutritional content, dried under conditions that preserve its feed value, and stored in ways that prevent spoilage while maintaining accessibility throughout the winter months. The cutting of hay using scythes or sickles is physically demanding work that requires developed technique and considerable endurance to complete efficiently. The rhythmic motion of scything, while appearing simple to observers, requires precise coordination of body movement, tool handling, and blade maintenance to achieve the productivity necessary for successful haymaking operations. The drying and storage of hay presents logistical challenges that require careful planning and favorable weather conditions to complete successfully. Your hay must be dried sufficiently to prevent mold and spoilage, while retaining enough moisture to maintain its nutritional value and palatability for livestock consumption. The timing of hay drying operations must balance the need for adequate moisture removal with the risk of weather damage from unexpected precipitation. Your vegetable production activities during the summer months focus on crops that provide essential nutrition while offering good storage characteristics that allow them to supply fresh food throughout the winter season. Your vegetable garden, which might seem modest by modern standards, represents a critical component of your nutritional strategy that supplies vitamins, minerals, and variety to a diet that would otherwise consist primarily of grain products and preserved meats. The intensive cultivation required for successful vegetable production involves daily attention to watering, pest control, and harvesting that must be coordinated with your other farming activities. Your vegetables compete with grain crops, livestock care, and infrastructure maintenance for your limited time and attention, requiring efficient management strategies that maximize productivity while minimizing labor requirements. The preservation of vegetables for winter consumption begins during the growing season as you harvest crops at optimal maturity and process them using techniques that extend their storage life while maintaining nutritional value. Your food preservation methods include drying, salting, fermentation, and root cellar storage that transform fresh vegetables into preserved foods that can sustain your family through the months when fresh produce is unavailable.
The arrival of autumn brings with it a sense of urgency that pervades every aspect of your farming operation as you race to complete the harvest and prepare for winter before the first killing frost destroys your crops and the seasonal cycle begins anew. This is the season when all of your spring planning, summer labor, and careful resource management either pay off in successful harvests or reveal themselves as inadequate preparation for another year of subsistence living. The grain harvest represents the culmination of your agricultural year and determines your family's survival prospects for the coming winter. The timing of grain harvest is critical because crops that are collected too early may not have achieved full nutritional development, while those left too long in the field risk destruction by weather, pests, or simple over-ripening that reduces their storage quality. Your grain harvesting techniques involve cutting mature crops using sickles or scythes, bundling the cut grain into sheaves that can be easily handled and transported, and allowing the harvested grain to dry properly before threshing separates the edible seeds from the inedible stalks and chaff. This process requires favorable weather conditions, adequate labor, and proper equipment to complete successfully within the narrow window of optimal harvest timing. The threshing process, which separates grain from stalks through beating or trampling, is labor-intensive work that requires proper facilities and equipment to achieve efficient separation while minimizing grain loss. Your threshing might be accomplished using flails, by having animals trample the grain, or through other techniques that have been developed through generations of agricultural experience. The winnowing process, which uses wind to separate grain from chaff and debris, requires proper weather conditions and technique to achieve the clean grain that can be stored successfully through the winter months. Your winnowing techniques involve tossing threshed grain into the air and allowing wind to carry away the lighter chaff, while the heavier grain falls back into collection containers. The calculation of grain yields and allocation for different purposes represents one of the most critical mathematical exercises of your farming year. You must estimate how much grain to reserve for seed, how much to allocate for family consumption, how much to set aside for livestock feed, and how much might be available for trade or emergency reserves. These calculations involve complex assessments of family nutritional needs, livestock requirements, seed viability, and storage losses that will occur during the winter months. Your root vegetable harvest requires different techniques and timing than grain crops, as you carefully excavate crops that have been growing underground throughout the summer season. The harvest of turnips, carrots, onions, and other root vegetables must be timed to occur after they have achieved full development, but before soil freezing makes excavation difficult or impossible. The processing and storage of root vegetables involves cleaning, sorting, and storing techniques that maximize their storage life while maintaining easy access throughout the winter months. Your root storage methods might include root cellars, sand storage, or other techniques that provide the proper environmental conditions for long-term vegetable preservation. The slaughter and preservation of livestock represents another critical autumn activity that provides the meat protein necessary for winter survival, while reducing the number of animals that must be fed through the harsh season. Your slaughter decisions involve complex calculations of animal productivity, feed availability, and family protein needs that determine which animals will be preserved for breeding and production, and which will be converted into preserved meat. The meat preservation process involves butchering, cutting, and preserving techniques that convert fresh meat into products that can be stored safely through the winter without refrigeration. Your meat preservation methods include smoking, salting, drying, and other techniques that prevent spoilage while maintaining nutritional value and palatability. As autumn progresses toward winter, your attention turns to the final preparations that will determine your family's comfort and survival during the harsh months ahead. This includes the collection and storage of fuel for heating and cooking, the completion of building maintenance and weatherproofing projects, and the organization of stored goods to ensure easy access during winter's confinement. The gathering of fuel materials represents a major autumn activity that requires the collection, processing, and storage of whatever combustible materials are available in your region. Your fuel supplies might include firewood, peat, dried dung, or other materials that can provide the heat necessary for cooking and warmth during the winter months. The final equipment maintenance and storage activities of autumn prepare your tools and implements for winter storage, while ensuring that they will be ready for use when spring arrives. This includes cleaning, oiling, repairing, and properly storing equipment in ways that prevent rust, rot, and other deterioration that could render them useless when they are needed again. As the first snows begin to fall and autumn transitions into another harsh Scandinavian winter, you take inventory of your preparations and assess your family's prospects for surviving another cycle of the seasonal rhythm that defines Viking farming life. The stores of grain, preserved meat, and other foods that fill your storage areas represent the fruits of months of careful labor and planning, while the fuel supplies and maintained equipment demonstrate your readiness for the challenges that winter will certainly bring. Tomorrow will mark the beginning of another winter's test of your preparations and skills, but tonight you can rest with the knowledge that you have once again successfully completed the complex dance of seasonal survival that is the heart of Viking farming existence. Chapter 5. The Delicate Science of Food Preservation. The art and science of food preservation in Viking-era Scandinavia represents perhaps the most critical skill set that determines the difference between survival and starvation during the long winter months when fresh food production is impossible. Unlike modern households that rely on refrigeration, freezing, and commercially preserved foods, your survival depends entirely on your ability to transform perishable harvests into stable, nutritious foods that can sustain your family through 4 to 6 months of harsh weather when hunting and gathering opportunities are severely limited. Picture this. You're standing in your food preparation area during the height of autumn harvest, surrounded by the bounty of your agricultural year, knowing that everything you see must be converted into preserved forms within a matter of days or weeks before natural decay processes render it inedible. The pressure of this timeline creates an urgency that permeates every aspect of food processing, because failure to complete preservation tasks properly and promptly means watching months of agricultural labor literally rot before your eyes. Your food preservation knowledge has been accumulated through generations of trial and error, representing a sophisticated understanding of microbiology, chemistry, and food science that has been developed without the benefit of modern scientific instruments or theoretical frameworks. This knowledge is based on careful observation of which techniques produce safe, nutritious preserved foods, and which methods result in spoilage, illness, or death from food poisoning. The fundamental principle underlying all of your food preservation techniques is the control of moisture, oxygen, temperature, and acidity levels that bacteria, molds, and other microorganisms require for growth and reproduction. Your preservation methods work by creating environmental conditions that are hostile to harmful microorganisms while maintaining the nutritional value and palatability of the preserved foods. Salt preservation represents one of your most important and versatile food preservation techniques, though the salt required for effective preservation represents a valuable commodity that must be obtained through trade, or if you're fortunate enough to live near the coast, through the labor-intensive process of evaporating seawater. The salt used for food preservation is not the refined product that modern consumers purchase in convenient containers, but coarse, unrefined salt that contains various minerals and impurities that actually enhance its preservative properties. The process of salt curing meat involves coating fresh meat with coarse salt that draws moisture from the tissue while creating an environment that prevents bacterial growth. This process requires precise calculation of salt quantities, proper timing, and environmental conditions that allow the salt to penetrate the meat thoroughly while preventing spoilage during the curing process. The salt-cured meat that results from this process can be stored for months without refrigeration while maintaining its nutritional value and developing distinctive flavors that make it highly prized for both consumption and trade. Your fish preservation techniques represent a critical component of your food security strategy, particularly if you have access to coastal waters or inland fishing opportunities that provide seasonal abundance of protein that must be preserved for year-round consumption. The smoking and drying of fish requires specialized knowledge of species-specific preservation requirements, as different types of fish respond differently to various preservation techniques. The construction and operation of smoking facilities requires understanding of combustion processes, airflow management, and temperature control that produces the proper conditions for effective food preservation. Your smoking setup might consist of a simple structure that allows you to control the exposure of foods to smoke while maintaining the temperatures necessary for effective preservation without cooking the food to the point where its texture and nutritional value are compromised.
Dairy preservation represents another critical component of your food security strategy, transforming the abundant milk production of summer into preserved dairy products that can supply protein, fat, and calcium throughout the winter months. Your dairy preservation techniques include the production of various fermented products that use beneficial bacteria to create acidic environments that prevent spoilage while developing complex flavors and improved digestibility. The cheese-making process requires precise control of temperature, acidity, and moisture levels that transform liquid milk into solid products that can be stored for extended periods without refrigeration. Your cheese-making techniques involve the use of natural enzymes and bacterial cultures that have been maintained through generations of dairy production, creating distinctive products that reflect local environmental conditions and traditional processing methods. The controlled fermentation processes that transform fresh foods into preserved products represent some of the most sophisticated biotechnology that your civilization possesses, though you understand these processes through practical experience rather than scientific theory. Your fermentation techniques harness the metabolic activities of beneficial microorganisms to create foods that are not only preserved, but often more nutritious and digestible than their fresh counterparts. The production of fermented grain products, including various types of porridges and breads, involves techniques that improve the digestibility and nutritional availability of grain while extending its storage life. Your fermentation processes begin with the cultivation and maintenance of naturally occurring yeasts and bacteria that are responsible for the fermentation reactions that transform grain into preserved foods. The brewing process that produces ale and other fermented beverages represents both a food preservation technique and a critical component of your family's nutrition and hydration strategy. The alcoholic beverages that result from controlled fermentation provide calories, vitamins, and minerals while offering a safer alternative to potentially contaminated water sources. Your brewing techniques require understanding of fermentation chemistry, ingredient selection, and process control that produces consistent, safe, and palatable beverages. The fermentation vessels and equipment used in your brewing operations are carefully maintained and dedicated exclusively to brewing activities to prevent contamination that could ruin entire batches of precious ingredients. Your brewing equipment represents a significant investment in materials and craftsmanship, requiring wooden barrels, ceramic vessels, and various implements that are designed specifically for fermentation processes. Your vegetable fermentation techniques transform fresh produce into preserved foods that retain much of their nutritional value while developing distinctive flavors and improved digestibility. The fermentation of cabbage, turnips, and other vegetables creates acidic environments that prevent spoilage while producing foods that supply essential vitamins during the winter months when fresh vegetables are unavailable. The sauerkraut production process involves the careful layering of shredded cabbage with salt in containers that allow fermentation to proceed under controlled conditions. This process requires understanding of the proper salt concentrations, environmental conditions, and timing that produce successful fermentation while preventing spoilage that could render the entire batch inedible. Your fermented dairy products, including various forms of cultured milk and butter, represent sophisticated biotechnology that transforms perishable milk into products with extended storage life and enhanced nutritional properties. These fermentation processes involve the cultivation of specific bacterial cultures that produce the acids and flavors that characterize different types of fermented dairy products. The production of fermented fish products, where available, involves techniques that transform fresh fish into protein-rich preserved foods that can supply essential amino acids throughout the winter months. These fermentation processes require careful control of environmental conditions and timing that produce safe, nutritious preserved fish while preventing the development of harmful bacteria that could cause illness or death. The storage systems that protect your preserved foods throughout the winter months represent critical infrastructure that determines whether your preservation efforts result in successful food security or catastrophic spoilage that leaves your family facing starvation. Your food storage techniques must provide protection from moisture, temperature extremes, pests, and contamination, while allowing access to stored foods throughout the winter months. Your root cellar construction represents one of the most important infrastructure investments you can make, providing the controlled environment necessary for storing root vegetables, preserved meats, and other foods that require cool, stable temperatures. The excavation and construction of an effective root cellar requires understanding of soil conditions, drainage, insulation, and ventilation that maintains optimal storage conditions throughout the winter months. The design of your root cellar must balance the need for temperature stability with protection from flooding, freezing, and moisture infiltration that could destroy stored foods. Your construction techniques involve careful attention to drainage systems, wall construction, and ventilation that creates a stable microenvironment that preserves food quality while preventing spoilage. Your grain storage systems represent perhaps the most critical component of your food security infrastructure, protecting the grain that will provide the majority of your family's calories throughout the winter months. The containers used for grain storage must provide protection from moisture, insects, and rodents, while allowing for easy access and inventory management. The construction of grain storage containers involves techniques that create pest-proof, moisture-resistant vessels using available materials, including wood, ceramics, and woven materials. Your grain storage containers must be sized appropriately for the quantities of grain you need to store while fitting within the available storage space in your homestead. Your meat storage techniques involve the construction of specialized facilities that provide the environmental conditions necessary for different types of preserved meat products. Smoked meats require dry storage conditions that prevent mold growth, while salt-cured meats need protection from moisture that could dissolve the salt and compromise preservation. The organization of your food storage systems requires careful planning that ensures efficient use of available space while maintaining easy access to frequently used items. Your storage organization must also consider the different storage requirements of various food types, grouping foods with similar environmental needs while preventing cross-contamination between different preserved products. Your inventory management systems allow you to track the quantities and condition of stored foods throughout the winter months, enabling you to ration consumption appropriately while identifying foods that may be approaching the end of their storage life. This inventory management is performed through visual inspection, systematic rotation of stored goods, and careful record-keeping that tracks consumption rates and remaining supplies. The pest control measures that protect your stored foods from insects, rodents, and other pests represent an ongoing battle that requires constant vigilance and intervention. Your pest control techniques include physical barriers, traps, and natural repellents that prevent pest access to stored foods while avoiding contamination of edible supplies. The monitoring of stored food quality throughout the winter months requires regular inspection of preserved foods to identify early signs of spoilage that could spread to other stored products. Your quality assessment techniques involve visual inspection, smell evaluation, and texture assessment that allows you to identify foods that are beginning to spoil before they contaminate other stored supplies. As winter progresses and you draw upon your carefully preserved food supplies, you experience the satisfaction that comes from successful food preservation and storage. Knowing that your family's survival through another harsh season depends upon the complex systems of preservation, storage, and management that you have developed and maintained. Each meal drawn from preserved supplies represents a victory against the natural processes of decay and the harsh realities of subsistence living in medieval Scandinavia. Tomorrow will bring new challenges to your food security systems and new tests of your preservation skills. But tonight, you can rest with the knowledge that your mastery of food preservation science has once again proven adequate to sustain life in one of the world's most challenging environments.